This video I'm going to sand down and apply Bondo to this tractor hood, then I will use primer and spray paint to restore it back to looking more like it did before it got all beat up. So I'm going to start off using a palm sander with 100 grit sandpaper, and what I'm looking to do is keep sanding down on the tractor hood until I don't see any shiny spots in the paint anymore. I don't have a lot of experience doing body work, so I'll be using two different sanders along with different grit sandpapers, and I will give my opinion on what worked best for me during this restoration. I know that I need to be careful once I get down to metal though, because it's possible to sand all the metal away so you're left with a hole which can end up cracking the Bondo over time. Next I'm going to remove the hood ornament to make it easier to sand and paint, so I will lift the hood up and take the nuts on the bottom of the ornament off, and then I can pop it off to begin sanding again. So as I alluded to before, what I'm looking to do is remove as much of the green paint as I can, or at least sand it down until I don't see any of the gloss of the paint anymore. And I will just keep sanding until I don't see any shine at all, with the exception of right above the decals, since I don't want to damage them. Then after I'm done sanding, I will wipe the hood down really well with an old shirt to get it ready to apply Bondo on and around all the dented areas to try to smooth out the hood as much as possible. Now I'm going to mix the Bondo with the hardener, but before I do that, I want to mix up the hardener just in case it settles, so I just start squeezing the tube randomly all around it. The consensus seems to be that for every golf ball size of Bondo, you'll want to squeeze out about an inch of hardener on top, but here I end up using too much of both, so I won't be able to spread it all before it cures. I'm going to use an old credit card to spread the body filler out, and what I'm trying to do is smooth it over all the dents so I can sand down around them to make it look as if the metal is shaped how it originally was. I will only have around 3 to 5 minutes to spread the filler out before it starts to harden, and I can definitely tell when it starts doing that, because it will stop spreading smoothly across the hood. Now I want to point out that it's recommended to sand all the paint off, so it's bare metal, but I've read comments about a feather rule, where you can sand the dents all the way down and just feather the paint around it. I also read that if you apply the Bondo over paint, it will only be as strong as the paint's bond to the metal, so I figure it will be fine since this paint was applied by the manufacturer. And here is where I can start to tell that the Bondo is curing, because it starts crumpling up as I try to spread it, so this is when I realize that I mixed too much and wasted half of it. Then when I try scraping more filler to spread, the whole Bondo mixture comes off, which felt like a big piece of rubber when handling it before I threw it away. So this time I'm going to try to use only half the amount I used last time, along with a little over an inch for the line of blue hardener, which is probably still too much since it looks less than a golf ball size. I also try using a small piece of wood I cut off to mix this batch with, so I can just throw it out when I'm done, since it took quite a bit of time to clean off the putty knife I used last time. The wood works really well for mixing, and the amount seemed to be perfect for the limited time I have to spread it, so I will just continue mixing and spreading it this same way until I have most of the dents covered. Next I will use a Surform pocket plane to knock down the high spots while the Bondo is still somewhat soft, and also to try to fix the spot where I tried to spread the body filler after it had cured too much. So I will take the pocket plane and press it down into the area of the Bondo I want to level out, and then slide it over the high spots so it will work like a cheese grater to bring down any body filler that is sticking out. And I will just keep doing that over and over again until the areas I'm working on are flat enough to start sanding down and blend the edges of the body filler in. Again, this will be much easier to do if you don't wait too long after the application, because the Bondo will be softer, so it will peel off better than it would if it was cured more. So I will continue to do this all around the hood, where I applied the Bondo, focusing mainly on all the high spots until it feels like it's somewhat flat in every area. Then I will grab my round 5-inch orbit sander that has 80 grit sandpaper attached to sand down and blend in the edges of the Bondo until it feels uniform across the area. And when doing this, I will try to focus on keeping most of the sanding disc on the spreaded Bondo, so the edges of it will blend in more with the paint and exposed metal. I'll try to limit the contact I have with the metal, since the 80 grit sanding paper is more coarse than the other grits that I'll be using, so it will thin out the metal faster. Then after I have the Bondo sanded down to where it looks somewhat uniform with the rest of the tractor hood, I'll feel around and look for edges that stick out before wiping the hood down really well for the next application. So I will mix up another batch of Bondo using more of the hardener than I should have used, and then I'll spread it out over top of the first application, focusing mostly on the dented areas that make the hood uneven. Next I will use the planer to shave off all the high spots again and sand it down using the 80 grit paper until the dented areas are smoothed down and all the Bondo edges are blended in once more. Then I will wipe the hood down really well and start to feel around for low spots to mark an X on them with a Sharpie, so I know where I need to apply the last batch of Bondo I'm about to mix up. Now this last batch I will use a little less than a golf ball size of Bondo, so that means I will also use a little less than an inch of hardener with it, and then I'll mix it up right before applying it to all the marked areas. So using the same old expired credit card, I'll spread the Bondo mixture out over all the low spots and try to smooth it all out as much as possible to make it easier to shape. Then one last time I will shave off the high spots using the planer and sand it all down, but this time I'll use 100 grit sanding paper so I will get a smoother finish. When it comes to sanding paper grit, the higher the grit number, the smoother the finish will be since the lower numbers have larger particles and are more coarse abrasives. And after I have all the Bondo areas as smooth as possible with the 100 grit, I will switch over to 120 grit sanding paper for the final sanding pass. This will be where I pay the most attention to the detail of the Bondo surface since it will be the last time I sand before I apply the primer coat. I will pay particular attention to the edges of the Bondo. I want to make sure they're blended in really well since the paint will show any areas that are uneven where the Bondo transitions over to the paint or metal. So I continue sanding with the 120 grit sandpaper until it looks and feels like I have a smooth surface over the entire hood, but I see a couple rough spots so I switch back to the 100 grit to sand down faster. And after I have all the rough spots sanded out, I will switch back to the 120 grit sandpaper and use it until I'm satisfied with the look and feel of the areas where I applied the Bondo to cover all the dents. Then I will wipe the hood down and examine it even closer for imperfections I still need to sand out, and I find an area that could use more sanding, so I will use both sanders to smooth it out before a final wipe down. Now I'm going to use some regular masking tape to cover up the decals so they don't get paint on them, and then I'll use a razor blade to cut along the edges and peel off the excess tape. Then I will use some sandpaper and hand sand on all the shiny parts of the existing paint on the sides to rough it up so the primer and new paint will be less likely to peel off after it dries. Next, I place plastic and garbage bags over the rest of the tractor so it won't get overspray when I apply the primer coat, which is what I'm about to do next after I mask off the gas cap with tape. So after I get done with the masking, I'll tuck the rest of the plastic inside the hood so it is the only part that is exposed, and then I will start spraying the first Krylon brand primer coat on the tractor hood. The primer coating will make it a lot easier to see imperfections on the hood, but I can still shape the rough spots a little bit by building up the coats of primer and then sanding it down. So that is what I will do next after letting the primer coat dry for about an hour. I will try to use my palm sander with the 100 grit paper at first, but it gums up the coating quite a bit, so I will switch over to hand sanding. This first coat I will be focusing on the higher spots that make the hood look uneven, and they are a lot easier to see after I rough up the primer by lightly sanding across the surface. I am using 150 grit sandpaper to hand sand the primer, and it seems to work really well in that it sands down the high spots without leaving deep gouges in the coating, so I will continue to use this grit for the primer. Then I will try using my air blower to get rid of all the sanding dust, but it ends up blowing the plastic all over the place, so I won't try that again because it seems like wiping it down with a rag removes all the dust as well. Now I apply the second coat of primer, and this time it's easier to see the low spots that need filled in a little more, so I can start to even the body out as I'm spraying this layer on the hood. And after waiting another hour for the primer to dry enough to where I can start hand sanding again, I will work around the hood focusing mainly on sanding the higher spots so they will be more even with the low spots. I was working at night this time and it got really cold out, so this application ended up creating a scale-like effect in it, and sanding caused deep gouging in some places, so I decided to wait for it to warm up more. So the next day, I applied a third coat of primer focusing more on the trouble areas again, and this time I waited a couple of hours for the coating to dry before I started sanding. I will go through the entire hood and try to smooth out the primer so it's more uniform and blemish-free, but this time I figured out that sanding works a lot better if I just sand in the direction towards the blemishes. Here is a close-up of me still using the 150 grit sandpaper to pull the primer back into some low spots until the surface area becomes more level, so it won't stick out as much after the paint has been applied. So that is essentially what I'm doing as I go around the rest of the hood to hand sand the low spots and blemished areas until I am satisfied that I've done all that I can do with this latest coat of primer. Then I will wipe it down to prepare it for the last coat of primer, where I will use the rest of the spray can and focus only on the areas that still have surface blemishes that I want to cover up. Now after a couple of hours waiting for that last touch-up coat to dry, I will do a final hand sanding over the entire hood until I'm happy that I have all the dents covered up and all the primer smoothed out. Next I will wipe it down and inspect the hood closely one last time for any blemishes that I didn't see before so I can fix them before I apply the first coat of paint that matches the rest of the tractor. So now that I have it wiped down thoroughly, I will shake up the spray paint can really well and spray the entire hood under bright lights until all the primer is covered with green paint. Having enough light while painting is really important because if you don't have enough of it, you might not be able to see the shine on the paint that will show how much coverage you have sprayed on. So when painting the sides, I will use a little spotlight so I can see the shine to know that I have enough of the green paint over top of the primer so the gray color of it won't show through. Now after letting the first coat dry for about 20 minutes, I will come back out and spray on another coat again while shining plenty of light on the areas that I'm applying the paint. I also don't want to spray too much in one spot because the paint will start to run, so if that should happen, I would need to let it completely dry and then sand the paint run down until it's flat again. So after letting both coats dry for several hours, I will come back out and apply the final coat, making sure to spray as evenly as possible across the whole top of the hood so the paint will look more uniform on the top. I will let this final coat sit to dry for over 24 hours before I start to take all the masking tape off, which I will want to peel off very carefully so the overlapping paint on the tape won't pull the paint off the hood. I also use a razor blade to cut the paint at the edge of the masking tape so it's easier to pull off. This will also help to prevent pulling the paint off the body while removing the tape. Next, I will remove all the plastic and garbage bags that I used to protect the rest of the tractor from overspray and set that aside to fold up later. Now all I have to do is use my razor blade again to help cut the masking tape off of the decals on both sides of the hood, and I can move on to the final step of putting the hood ornament back on and installing new lights. So that is the last thing that I do, and I am very happy with how this project turned out. The paint ended up matching the rest of the tractor really well, so it raised the value quite a bit after I fixed the rest of the tractor up. Hopefully this video has helped, and feel free to ask any questions that you still may have in the comments. Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe for more quick and on-point videos.